Welcome. We're here with Frederick Brown, Director of Strategy and Development of Learning Forward. Welcome, Frederick.
Thank you.
We've talked a lot about the merits of putting teacher learning at the centre of a school. Frederick, can you talk to us a little about what a school might do to really embed this culture of learning and performance?
Oh, there's so much that one can do. So first, creating this atmosphere where there's transparency of practice. So if you have teachers who, and I was one of those teachers during my first year, I would close the door, I'd be there with my 25 to 30 children, and off we'd go. But in a culture that embraces learning, there's complete transparency. So when you have teachers working together, teacher A has the opportunity and is welcome to come into teacher B's classroom and vice versa, and then have a conversation around what they saw and what they experienced. Teachers who are open and willing to, and this is an interesting one, videotape their classrooms and allow that videotape of their practice to be something that can be discussed at the grade level or at the team level or just between two teachers. If a teacher is very transparent and reflective about their practice, in staff meetings or in gatherings where there's conversation about practice. So when you create that kind of culture, that's something that's going to move you forward. What helps all that happen is when the leader also is transparent about her or his culture or reflections of learning. So if you can imagine, for example, a leader who is struggling with the new teaching standards, being very transparent about those struggles and talking through what his or her learning might be like, and the challenges that she's facing and the opportunities that he might be experiencing, that helps to create that culture of openness and transparency that I think is one of the first critical elements in a learning culture.
Can you talk us through some of the key components of developing a framework around this at a school level?
Well, again, our standards, I think, serve as those critical components. So, and I won't go through them all, but if you have a leadership team structure, or a structure in the school that allows for collaboration to happen, then you can start to have the kind of conversations that will lead to this learning culture. If the resources in the school, as in the people and the time and some of the financial resources, can be diverted to support this type of culture of learning, then you're more likely to see it at scale and sustained. If you as a teacher or a leader can use some of the protocols that are available, and there's so many that are out there that just get you started on the kinds of questions that you can start to ask each other and the kinds of things that you need to be thinking about as you engage in this whole type of collective responsibility and this continuous improvement process to lead towards improved teaching and learning. So those are some of the tools and elements, and as you go through the rest of the standards and as you look through your own charter for professional learning, there's some very key elements in there that start to paint a picture of what those pieces might look like.
Let's talk a bit more about the idea of collaboration and the role of that in, I guess, developing this culture within the school.
So teachers, like all of us, want to interact with other individuals. It's hard sometimes being a teacher, so I can tell you that there were days when I thought, am I ever going to get a chance to just have some time to myself? Because my days were in there with the students, loving my time with the students, but then it was off to lunch, and I was the type of teacher who wanted to be at the lunch table saying, okay, let's go through some of our facts and let's think about this. And then after lunch it was time to get back into the classroom. So there were days I remember when I thought, wow, did I actually have lunch? Because I don't think I did. But when you create a culture of collaboration, you structure some time so that you can be with other adults and start to talk about the practice in which you are all engaged. And all of a sudden you start to see that the way you're doing things may not be the way that the person down the hall is doing things. And you might start to realize that we can learn a lot from each other. Again, your standards put you in a great position because now all of a sudden you have pictures of what effective teaching looks like. And they can serve as the basis for a lot of your conversations. So instead of having kind of a vague conversation about teaching and et cetera, you can say, you know, on standard 3 and descriptor 3.2, this is an area where I think I need some support. And so we can start to have collaborative conversations around that. You can imagine two teachers having a book study just focused on that one area. You can imagine a team of teachers coming together. Again, the leader may have created the structure and the time to allow this to happen, but it's the teachers taking ownership of their own learning and say, this is an area where we see a need. And so we want to come together and have this conversation. So all of those kinds of things that are in place right now in this country position, I think, teachers and leaders well to have some great collaborative experiences.
So if you were speaking with a school leader, what advice would you give them simply to better take back to their school around how to embed this culture, particularly around collaboration?
Well, first of all, to create the structures to allow it to happen. Of course, 2 teachers, 3 teachers, a team, they'll find time, or at least could find time after school perhaps, or before, to have some of these sorts of collaborative conversations. But if you create a structure in the school and your leadership team, you can imagine working together to create this structure and create this time to allow for this collaboration, then it certainly makes it a lot easier. The other thing that is really important is we as teachers, and I know this is how I was as a teacher, I just wanted to sometimes talk about, oh, what a rough day it was, or this one child, could you believe what he said? Because those events happen all the time. But at the same time, if there was an expectation that in addition to those sorts of things that I have to get off my chest because I just can't, I don't want to take it home, but if there's an expectation that we'll also have this higher level, deeper, rich conversation about our practice informed by various protocols so that we can focus our conversation, then you can imagine that environment is going to start after a while to just embed this way of thinking into their daily practice.
We've talked a lot about how to, I guess, go about developing this very strong culture of learning within our schools. Mm-hmm. How do you find the distinction, or how do you equally balance the idea of individual performance and collective or collaborative performance of teachers?
Well, as I understand it now, there's a designation or a certain level of each of your teachers from graduate up to lead. And I think that's really important, and I think that's an interesting way and a very positive way to think about a teacher's development and growth. But also, as I understand it, there is not any way to have a designation for a team at this time. And so it's not possible necessarily to have a lead team or a highly accomplished team in your schools. And I would say that's the case back in the States as well. Even though we know that that's the best way teachers learn, and all of us learn for that matter, we learn best with our colleagues. We don't have a way of recognizing that learning or giving someone or a team sort of a designation or a status of having achieved a certain level of learning or mastery. So if there were a way, and I don't have the answer, but if there were a way to have a learning team level, that would be very interesting. So one of the ways that we do that in our organization is, because we know that that's how people learn best, we have what we call our learning team designation. And it's actually a learning team award that we offer. And we asked teams of teachers from across the country to submit videos of themselves as a team engaging in collaborative learning with each other around students and performance and teaching and learning and all those things that we know are important. And we look at all those videos and we're able to make most of them available to our wider public and our constituents. But it just gives people a chance to model the kinds of things that we've been preaching all along, which is this is how people learn best. Mm.
Tell us, what role do you see students playing in developing this effective culture within a school?
Well, it's all about the children, right? So the students are the ones that we're there for, and their voice is really important. You remind us and others remind us that we really have to pay attention to student voice. I mentioned during the conference here that there was one school that they started to pay attention to the types of dialogue that they were hearing from students and in which classes students were speaking most. And they started to look for patterns for where kids were speaking and what they were talking about. And in that very structured way, they were able to quickly determine what sorts of things engage students more in conversation in class with teachers and with each other. So that's one way to start to collect some data on what the students are saying and how they're saying it and when they're saying it. But the other thing is, and this was certainly my history, when I was a principal, I had what was called a Principal's Advisory Council. Mm. Different than what we call a student council. This was focused on teaching and learning. And so I invited a group of our children from various grade levels within the school to have conversations with me, the principal, about what good teaching was happening and or not happening in their schools. And I wanted to do several things. One, give them an opportunity to have voice and have a audience with the principal and have a conversation about teaching and learning. But two, to develop leadership skills within them, because I wanted them to see that they could start to take ownership of their own learning in their own environments as well. So it's absolutely critical that students be given an opportunity to have their voices be heard in the schools.
So after your week in Australia and thinking about the lessons that you've brought to us from Learning Forward, what's the most important message you would like to leave our school leaders and our teachers here?
There's so much that you've already done that's so wonderful. And teachers and leaders, it's very clear, are working very hard in this country as they are in our own. And as a matter of fact, I think it was someone who told me at the conference that the teachers, of course, in New South Wales are working much harder than the teachers in Victoria, and then I heard vice versa. There's such a level of competition, healthy competition in this country, that I think you use it to your advantage. So how do you create an environment where you can push all of us to work at our very best? How do you create an environment where the teachers all over this country can go above and beyond to meet the needs of their children? So I think you have all the pieces in place, as I've said before. You have a picture of what effective teaching looks like. That's wonderful. I wish we could be there, but we're not as a country. You have a picture of what effective leadership looks like. That's so important because oftentimes that's forgotten. And you have a real good sense of what the curriculum should be for your students. Also very, very important. So all I can say is leverage all of those things and continue down the path that you're on. Because if you do, I know that, and I guess your students will just start to continue to go on this upward trajectory and start to outperform others throughout the world. And that's okay because, again, in this country, the idea from a student might come that might change the world. And so continue down the path that you're on, and of course, best of luck.
Thanks so much, Frederick.
Absolutely.